Okay, everybody's seeing my screen share?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we have a few updates to share with everybody. First is our new working group website. We've been working on it for a little while and it's quite overdue. So I want to share some of that with you. Okay, so hope everybody's seeing it on the screen. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that this website will serve as the place where you can go and find all of the information related to the group. It's pretty much got a lot of our noteworthy updates. To the right, you'll see all of the upcoming events. So we have this meeting, the agenda, and you'll be able to register for the future meetings in there. We'll still be sending everybody the link associated with the meeting, so you can go ahead and register. Anybody who's in our participation distribution list will receive that directly. But now there's this public face and this repository where you can all go to and find the documents that you need, all of the reference material that you need, past recordings of meetings when they're available, presentations, and everything else will be here. So this is under our past events. You'll see there all of the information regarding what we've done so far. One particular item I want to highlight in the kickoff meeting section, this is one thing we highly recommend that anybody who's missed it, any new participants, we strongly suggest you make sure you go back and review the kickoff meeting material. In there, we've set a lot of kind of our expectations for the group. We've laid out some of the work and also just kind of laid the groundwork for some of the concepts that we're going to be working with in the upcoming years. There is generally kind of a brief overview and background on this effort, and this is all just a summary of that expectations document that we did discuss at the kickoff. So that's for everybody's benefit. We have the goals and principles, and again, these are what the commission adopted for the engagement with this safety culture assessment framework, and we've adopted in our working group as guiding our engagement in this group as well. And we have a copy for the document. Anybody wants to take a look, those are the engagement expectations. Some more information that are in the engagement expectations. And I just kind of want to point you to the additional resources we have. All of the work plan, the decision, some of the information that we'll be talking about today, it's all down here, and anything additional that we think is useful for you to also have access to. For example, I want to point specifically to the Canadian Energy Regulators Learning Portal. We're not going to walk through it today, and actually that's something we have in mind for the next working session, is to walk you through this. But generally, this is a very, very helpful resource for all of you to have and navigate eventually and take a look. It has training modules, it has reference material, and it's all very grounded with everyday terms. So it makes the process less painful to start learning more about safety culture. It will very soon have an assessment guideline training, and that guideline is actually very aligned to what we are doing. They're in the process of having to put it in French and everything else, so it's not up there yet, which is why we're holding off until the next session to kind of walk you through it, so you are able to, just use that as a reference for our work as well. And any questions? We do have a mail for everybody to use contact. You can feel free to contact our members as well if you have connection already, but we have that in case any interested new participants are around and want to make sure that they're added to the distribution list and are up to date with that. So there are a few more updates, specifically our work plan. So I'll go to that right now. So if you give me just a moment. Okay, so everybody seeing the document on the screen? Work plan? I think so.
Yes.
Great. So as you know, this particular we have actually updated the group's original work plan, which we presented to you all at the kickoff last year. Primarily, the updates are around. Excuse me, if you see if everybody can see it properly. It seems a little cut off. Mainly the updates are around shifting some of these dates back a quarter or two, since we did not have a 2025 fourth quarter meeting last year. So that pushed some of our topics around. We added more precision to some of the long-term topics that are in the long-term. This is the light yellow right here. So we added a little bit more precision to that. And one topic that I do want to point out didn't exactly change in the work plan, but it had been part of our conversations, is the non-punitive reporting. As you might recall, this topic started surfacing at the third quarter meeting. And as a result, we had Chris Hart from the FAA come and have a conversation on non-punitive reporting systems earlier this year at the Q1 meeting. This was all with the intent of us forming a task force and developing a concept paper that could take us through, could explore this topic further, which was required by the decision. However, as we've evaluated the topics that we do have to work with right now, we are realizing that there isn't the bandwidth for the working group to take on that topic concurrently with the other topics that we need to address in the other priority, in the more higher priority categories simultaneously. So we just left the date for addressing that topic in 2027 as it was originally intended to be. However, we will be planning for this in the meantime so that when the time comes, we can jump right on it. So you may hear from us on this a little bit more from time to time in the coming months. Also, I think a big part of this is as part of this revision, we do want to gather your feedback on the work plan. For example, we want to hear what specific topics you think are missing here and that you'd like to see addressed, so that we may start a list of emergent topics and other parking lot topics potentially. So we'll follow up with you on those after this meeting. Just please make sure you are on the distribution list so that we can gather your thoughts and you can share your feedback. Then our last update is on SDG&E's assessment. So I will hand it to Rich White. Rich, are you on to give a brief update on this assessment?
So, just a minute. And I think you mean the SDG&E assessment?
SDG&E assessment, yeah.
Yes, that's correct. So we are on schedule to hire a contractor to perform the assessment on SDG&E. We anticipate that will start on time, sometime before August 1st. And the expected time for the project will run through most of the next fiscal year. And the expected completion time is sometime around May of next year. So we are very close to having a contractor signed. I don't want to announce anything yet because it's not formal yet, but we are very close to having a specific contractor contracted with. So that's all I have right now.
Great. Thank you, Rich. Are there any questions or comments on some of these updates? Bill, go ahead.
Hello?
Yep. Can hear you now.
Can you hear me now? Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. With respect to the assessment process, going from August to May 2027, uh, can you just talk briefly about why it takes 9 months or so to get assessment done?
So
What's involved?
that is not necessarily how long it will take. That's just the time frame we've allocated to it. Um, there are a number of things that are going to be done. One is SDG&E and the contractor have to figure out a schedule. And so that's going to be something we have to work through. One of the timing issues may be that some of the data collection will start sometime in the fall, which can run into the holidays. And so we're a little concerned that sometimes the holidays can take some time. And then there's a fair bit amount of time that we've had for kind of just unexpected things. So we're hopeful that the most of the collection and the actual assessment process will be running towards its end in February. And then it will just be, developing the final report. We're not quite sure, how that report will be finally managed. So we have a lot of slop time in there. The actual assessment of actual data collection is, I think, only about a month or so, month to 6 weeks. And then the rest of it is really sort of management.
Okay, thank you, Richard. That answers my question. And then if I can add on a follow-up question, just going back to the work plan, Carolina, you mentioned that we're changing those dates. Is the current work plan, is that all updated now with all the feedback, or is that still in the works, still under
Um,
construction?
yes, so the actual dates that have changed are updated in the document I shared. That document should be on the website as well in the next, hour or so. So you'll be able to see that. I will
Okay.
also share it as a follow-up so that all of you can provide your comments and feedback, whether on the leads, as you know, there's columns for leads, there's comment for dates, there's in the topics. So feel free to comment on everything and anything, and I'll provide more instruction on the follow-up, and you'll have that document. If you need to see it before we send it out, please make sure you go to the website and
No, that's great.
download it.
No, that's great information. Thank you. And then you had also mentioned about getting some feedback from the working groups. I really appreciate that. Thank you. That's it.
Yes, and you know what? I'm going to post we'll be sharing the slides, of course, after the meeting, but I'm going to share the link to the website on our chat, just so all of you can go to the. I think, Joe, you had a question? Joe Cisna?
Hi.
No?
Yeah, I just was wondering if maybe you've already shared it, but I was wondering where I can get the link to the website.
Yes, I'm actually going to put it right now on the chat. I think that it's going to make our lives a lot easier. Right now, you're just having to dig back through emails, and that doesn't work, I realize. But we do want to hear feedback from all of you on the functionality of the website as well, and what else you want to see on there, what else would be helpful to have. So as part of our feedback gathering after this meeting, we'll include the website too. So just keep that in mind. And I've just posted the link for you all. Any other questions? Okay, well, without further ado, we will continue. Just let me get my slides back up. Just a minute, I had trouble with that. Hey, is everybody seeing the slides now?
Yes.
Bear with me. I operate with so many screens open. So, okay. All right. So I'm going to do just a little brief background on the topic 1B, which is the subgroups effort on the industry specific examples. So for some background, essentially the phase 1 decision adopted a normative safety culture framework based on the USNRC's, that's the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission's safety culture common language. That is the framework used by the regulator and the industry that they harmonized, which describes 10 traits, which are the characteristics of what they think a healthy safety culture is. And it serves as the basis for now, as we've adopted and adapted to the utility industry, as the basis for assessing our utilities safety culture. However, I think the one thing to keep in mind is that while the traits themselves provide a common framework, the examples were not adapted to the utility industry. So there's examples in that framework that also exist in addition to the traits. The examples are currently nuclear industry specific. So the decision directed that one of the working group's early priorities be to develop industry-specific examples that illustrate what the traits might look like in the context of the California's gas and electric utilities. The importance of the work is reflected directly in the working group's working plan. That's what you see on the right. And this is the updated working plan, just FYI. It's one of our initial priorities in the working plan. On the right, you see how this is laid out. It's topic 1B, and it is co-led by the joint IOUs and CalPA. Now, before we look at the specific traits, which the IOUs and the subgroup will do, it's helpful to understand, why even safety culture frameworks exist in the first place. So safety culture, as we've talked a lot about in this working group, is complex. And it's often a very abstract concept. We all struggle sometimes with putting grounding, what it all means. So what the frameworks do, it's basically they help simplify that complexity by creating a common language and supporting assessments and improvement efforts when they come about, and essentially just helping everyone identify the strengths, the vulnerabilities, and opportunities for growth. It's also important to recognize that there is no single universally accepted safety culture framework. There's not such a thing. There's different frameworks and they use different terminology, different structures, different levels of detail. And some focus, for example, on positive cultural characteristics like the USNRC framework, while others include factors that can undermine safety culture, such as the frameworks by the Canadian Energy Regulator, James Reason's model, and the High Reliability Organizations model. So despite these differences, though, most frameworks are built on a common foundation and emphasize many of the same underlying themes. But we'll take a look at this in the next slide a little bit closer. So essentially, this slide compares several well-known safety culture frameworks. The point essentially that I made earlier is that while different frameworks use different terminology and structures, they are largely describing many of the same underlying concepts. The foundation of this comparison comes from work originally developed by the Canadian Energy Regulator, which compared several prominent models, which are included here. There's one I removed just because I haven't been able to find the model as a reference. And essentially, we have the IAEA model, James Reason's, the Swiss cheese model, the HRO model, BESIS, which is the Bureau, they regulate offshore oil and gas, and CER. And what I did, the NEB and a few other Canadian regulators, which is nuclear and also for offshore. NEB used to be what the CER, the Canadian Energy Regulator, used to be called. And I went through the exercise to expand it, that comparison, by adding a crosswalk to the USNRC safety culture traits, which is the framework we've adopted at the Commission. So the purpose of adding the USNRC column was really not to identify perfect, like one-to-one mapping, but rather it just illustrates how the concepts represented in the USNRC's 10 traits really align with the themes found across the other established frameworks. And what you might see, and it becomes clear, I think, clearer in this graphic, is that there is significant overlap. Regardless of the framework, common themes consistently emerge, and these include leadership commitment to safety, learning and continuous improvement, open communication and reporting, personal accountability, raising concerns and speaking up, problem identification and resolution, respectful work environments, and reliable work processes and organizational resilience. I would say that Bessie actually adopted pretty much very similar, the same type of traits as the USNRC. One thing to note is that the model represented from the IAEA as the first column, that's actually their older model. There is a newer model with harmonized traits or dimensions, you could say, that have been, that when the intent was to harmonize the models around different regulators, WANO, IAEA, USNRC, and whatnot, and come up with a model that also with the industry and with IMPO that everybody could agree on. So essentially, these commonalities really help explain why different frameworks often lead to similar conclusions about what supports a strong safety culture. And I don't like saying strong. I think the better word is healthy or positive in this cases. So as I mentioned earlier, though, at the same time, there are important differences. Some frameworks emphasize positive organizational characteristics such as leadership, learning, accountability, and others discuss more explicitly the failure pathways or the failure mechanisms or the threats to culture, such as complacency, normalization of deviance, production pressure, inadequate systems and resources. And as I mentioned earlier, these are represented by the CER's model, James Reason's, and the HRO, which is a high reliability organizations model. The frameworks all vary in the level of detail and how they organize the concepts. One point which I just mentioned is around how they combine several ideas into one broad dimension. For example, the IAEA model, but again, bear in mind what you see there, I think there's 5 domains in the IAEA model there, and that's the old model. And now they've actually expanded and they have closer to the same, they're very aligned with the USNRC model now. The USNRC model has 10 traits. So it just kind of differs, shows you how you can have many different concepts in a broader category, and then some will decide to break it out into more granular categories. So at the end of the day, what I'm trying to convey to you is that these models are really not competing views of safety culture. They're just different lenses for understanding the same underlying phenomenon. While the terminology and structure may differ slightly, they all share that common foundation. And so what it does to us, this comparison, I think, should provide us some confidence that the framework adopted by the Commission is consistent with broader safety culture thinking and reflects concepts that are widely recognized across industries and disciplines. So before we dig deeper into the normative framework that was adopted by the Commission, it's important to just provide a preliminary clarification on the purpose of these examples. So the framework is structured in 3 tiers: traits, attributes, and then the USNRC has that 3rd tier of examples. The examples are intended to show how the traits and attributes may manifest in practice. They help organizations interpret what an attribute looks like in the real world. So in the real world utility context, so essentially just operationalizing that trait. They provide observable behaviors and practices, and they may support our assessment discussions later on. One point that I think is really important to highlight is that the examples are illustrative. They are not exhaustive either. So they're not a checklist, they're not a requirement or a basis for behavioral assessments. Since these traits are also interrelated, multiple examples may reflect the same attribute, and different organizations may demonstrate traits in different ways. So it's primarily why these are really just illustrative. The broader goal of this effort is to support one of the working group's core objectives, is building a shared understanding of safety culture and creating a common language for discussing it. Finally, I would say that these examples are intended to be industry specific because the utility industry operates in a different context than the nuclear industry does. So there's differences in hazards, in the operational environments, the regulatory requirements, organizational structures and decision-making contexts. And all these may influence how culture is expressed in practice. That's not to say that when we go through these, they may not end up resembling pretty much what the US NRC framework has, but at least keeping that lens in mind of what the utility industry might differ from a nuclear can help us understand what the focus or the lens should be for these examples. So in short, these essentially will help bridge the gap between the framework and the day-to-day utility operations, making the traits easier to understand, to discuss, and operationalize. So with that, I will hand it over to Sarah and Michelle to get us going on their topics on their discussion for the subgroup.
There was another huge Galatians guys and took down. Look at that. That was just.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think yep, there we go.
Some other.
Thanks so much, Carolina. And I'm showing that my slides are sharing, so I just want to confirm with you all that they are.
Indeed, they are, Sarah. Thank you.
Perfect. Great. Thanks so much. So the portion of the agenda now is really focusing in on what the subgroup is doing and how we're going to be doing it. So Carolina did a great job of describing the why. So why are we drafting these examples? Why do we need to ensure that we understand the normative framework? And the subgroup co-leads will really kind of go into what we're going to be doing. So we're going to have two co-leads present today. First, we'll have Bill with Pacific Gas and Electric. He'll really be kind of giving us a normative framework refresher. That way we have a clear understanding of what these traits and attributes that we keep referencing are and how we'll be using them. So Bill, I'll pass it over to you. I'll be driving your slides for you unless you would like to share them, but I do have them pulled up.
Okay, that's great, Sarah. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
Okay. Yeah, great. So Carolina, thanks for that presentation. That was very good. I just really appreciated that. I'm going to try to add to it, but I think maybe my focus be a little bit more on the nuclear side of things, where Carolina gave us a broad industry and maybe a worldwide view. So, and along the way, if it's okay, Sarah, if anybody wants to ask questions along the way, I'm totally okay with that. So
yeah,
we'll go with
that's
that.
Totally fine. And I can kind of moderate that. If I see anything come in the chat, I'll let you know.
Okay, great. So my name is Bill Lalone. I work for Pacific Gas and Electric. Just a quick background as a matter of introduction. I spent most of my utility profession running power plants in plant operations and maintenance and planning. I'm a formerly an NRC licensed control room supervisor and operations manager. I spent a couple of years at INPO actually performing assessments on the nuclear industry with operations and with safety culture perspective, and then spent about another 4 years with a fleet oversight of plant operations over 4 nuclear stations. I'm a very strong advocate for safety culture. Couple of things. Just one example, as before I start, that really changed my perspective on things. I had an interview with the senior station director after I was promoted to control room manager, and I don't remember the conversation, but I would just share. This is the part that I do remember. He gave me two good leadership insights, and I think may be relevant here. One of them, he said, you won't remember all the good decisions you ever made, but you'll remember the bad ones because you will be reminded all the time. And the ones that you will remember the most is ones where you have mistreated people. And I thought that was very insightful. And so if I ever seem like I'm being disrespectful, please coach me. I accept the feedback. The second thing was, when you get promoted as a control room manager, one of the things you have to interview with the senior director of plant operations. And he said, you're going to be on night shift and things will happen as they always do. And you'll be required to make decisions. And as you make decisions, he said, we're going to be 100% supportive of your decision, Bill. But we reserve the right to question every decision you make once we come back on day shift. And you'll have to explain to me why you made every decision. And if it's not in compliance with our regulatory requirement, our procedures and processes, you'll have to tell me why. And he said the consequence of that is simply that you may have made a decision that impacts the public, and you may have just, lost jobs for everybody on the station. That weighed heavily on me as I continue on my career in the control room. And those two things I wanted to share with you that really framed and shaped my perspective about safety culture and its importance in working environment, not just in the nuclear industry, but even at the enterprise level. So I just wanted to share those things. I'll try to add on to maybe a little bit what Carolina did, and we'll go with that. Maybe slide 2, please. So, what is safety culture? When you look at the safety culture common language, or the new Reg 2165 document, it really states that it's at the most basic level, it's about our value and behaviors and how we prioritize things as when we have competing goals. So I think for most of the leaders on this call, what we value is what we see as an organization's commitment to safety. And if we value safety, you're going to see that. And I think when you see how we value safety, it's going to be the way we perform work in the field. And by the virtue of the first two, you create a safety culture environment. And I think those are just really good insights from this document, when you read through it. Number 3, please. I think there's a lot of folks on this call that are much better at this than I am at the regulatory foundation, but at the very highest level, as I got into my role, that is driven by SB 901 and AB 1054, which required the Commission and the Energy Safety to establish a safety culture assessment process. And the Commission then used this rulemaking 2110-001 to figure out how to implement those requirements in a consistent way. And the key issue that was identified was the lack of standardized approach, different definitions, different methods, and no common framework. And so rather than creating a new model, the Commission adopted the NRC and a little bit, in a way, IMPO common language framework. IMPO got their common language from the NRC side, which is already widely used. And it was nice that it was used in a high reliability industry like the nuclear. So we had some perspective how you would work in a very complex environment. And, importantly, as we go through this process, we know that safety culture assessment is not a one-time thing. It's not one and done. It's a continuous improvement philosophy. And so the working group's working with that. Next. I believe Carolina talked a lot about this, but I'll just go ahead and just maybe point out some key things. Why a normative framework? So it's a common language. So even though we all may speak similar, language and common words, the intent isn't always understood. And so this common language of safety culture using a common document as reference is going to be helpful for all of us. And it allows for consistent assessment approaches. It will help us to, that it gives confidence that it's based on nuclear and high reliability industry like nuclear power. And it isn't just at the United States. So United States is classified as INPO, but the world nuclear is classified as WANO. So the world nuclear operations have taken everything that we developed in the U.S. and rolled it out worldwide. So they get an opportunity to look at safety culture. And the part that really I'm impressed with is that this all supports a learning and continuous improvement, which is essential for us to continue to mature in the industry. And it facilitates opportunity to benchmark against each other and learn from each other. And I think as Sarah and Joanna talked about learning, and I think those are spot on. So I appreciate that. Next. So we talked a little bit about the framework structure, traits, attributes, and examples. And if it wasn't clear, traits define the framework, attributes clarify the intent, and examples, although not exhaustive, right, show what good looks like in practice. And I just put a little bit of a side-by-side comparison because the INPO nuclear side did borrow from the NRC side. But you can see that the NRC document, it's very clear. It's got the attribute, it's got the, trait and attribute, and then the examples. What you may see different on the INPO side, and maybe eventually, we may talk about this, is that the role part of the discussion in the NRC document, the INPO side took that and actually put the who component in the attribute section. And then in some cases, they even put that into the example section. And so that lines up the INPO document is more of an accountability document as well. Along with the attributes, the traits, attributes, and examples, they put the who component in there. So that's one of the key differences between the two documents, but certainly the basis for the INPO document is referenced in the NRC document. Next, please. When you look at the traits from the 2165 document, the new reg document, it does list all those 9 traits. The part that, to me, when you read that, it's very interesting, is that they had 9, but they didn't really have the 10th one until they did some modeling and mapping and all of the stuff that people do during the work group to understand and put them in themes. They said, the part that's missing is decision making. And oftentimes I've heard Richard always question, where's the decision making? And I think Richard's spot on with that. All these things are nice, but they all lead to decisions. And until we understand how decisions are being made, we may miss opportunities to continue to improve safety culture. So just wanted a little bit of insight from the team on that. What INPO did with that is they took those 10 attributes and actually put them into a categories, individual commitment to safety, management commitment to safety, and management systems. And what they did was they lined it up in a category that really works well for the stations, nuclear stations, functional areas. And so that everybody can kind of know where it goes. And it's helpful to look at it in maybe a sectional way as well. Okay, next, please. And Carolina mentioned this, that the framework is not it's not simply a checklist or scoring tool, right? It describes what healthy safety culture looks like. And it's not based on compliance requirements, it's above that. It's really designed for a learning organization and looking for opportunities to strengthen their organization. It allows for dialogue and continuous improvement, open dialogue, as it was mentioned earlier. And it allows us to internally assess ourselves on a continual way for continuous improvement, and occasionally get some outside review on how we're doing, which is always nice because sometimes we can get siloed into our own views. Next, please. So we talked about examples. Examples is, how we actually practice in the field, and we have some work to do in that area as we develop them for our own team. But just wanted to share a little bit about what that good looks like in the field. When you have one of the examples, maybe leaders are visibly demonstrate safety commitment through resource decisions like production pressures and essentially enough resources to do the job. Individuals feel good about raising safety concerns and without fear of retaliation. Decisions consistently balance, safety consideration with production operational requirement, and with safety as a priority, weighing over the other sides of the discussion. We have safety-related communications that goes across the organization, down to the organization, and be receptive to going back from the front line back up to the leadership. And that we have operating experiences that we can learn from the events, assessments, and roll-ups that is communicated across the whole organization. So we learn from our past mistakes, and that we're not prone to learn only by repeating them. So those are all good examples, but when you look at the examples that's in the new reg document, there's many there, and I'm excited about maybe developing them for our own utilities, so which is good. Next, please. I thought a little bit about what the working group use would look like for us, and we do have a work plan that Carolina shared with us, but maybe just a couple things that I would like to share. The framework provides a foundation which all of us, the working group and utility, in terms of assessment process. So it helps us to understand the assessment. We speak a common language, which is good. Each trait, attribute, examples, they're observable behaviors. So with that common language, we can, when they do assessments, we understand what the assessment is. And by the virtue of that common language and understanding, we can actually better help improve our organization. And lastly, it maintains consistency because of the common language during the assessment process. And also, as we talk with the outside organizations, like the folks coming there for San Diego Gas, they'll be familiar with, and we'll be familiar with the common language. So we're not cross-talking at each other. So that's all good stuff. So we're going to have an opportunity to practice all of this stuff, not just now, but continually from year to year, which is good. And lastly, key insights here. So just a little wrap up, right? Normative framework is a common foundation vocabulary for all of us. It's based on a proven complex nuclear industry, and it has demonstrated effectiveness there, at least in the United States. And then as we see that it's worldwide, people are using that. It supports learning and continuous improvement. And the part that I really like is constructive dialogue rather than punitive evaluation of compliance scoring. I like that a lot because if we want to rise above compliance, we have to be able to have constructive dialogue. It allows for consistent assessment approaches while having some flexibility for utility implementations, action implementations. And it provides some foundation for the working group, maybe some practical tools and collaboration among all of us, 4 of the utilities, including our SPD and Cal Advocates partners. So it allows for all of that. I'm excited about it. So I want to end my conversation there. If there's any questions or comments, I'm open to that. That's it.
Thanks so much, Bill. Are there any questions for him on his portion? Okay, I'm not seeing any, but if you think of some later, just put them in the chat and we can always come back to them. Thanks so much, Bill, for really kind of providing your perspective on how this normative framework can be used and should be used by the working group, and also providing us with a refresher, because I'm sure, you don't all have Appendix A memorized, right? So it's important to kind of come back to what we're doing and why we're doing it. But to really kind of continue the discussion around what the subgroup is going to be focusing on, I'd also like to welcome Ben from Cal Advocates. We talked a lot about, and even Bill just presented, about why this common understanding or a shared understanding on what the safety culture framework or what good or healthy looks like and why that's important. So Ben's going to continue that discussion from his perspective on what one of the main goals is for this subgroup and for the overall working group. So Ben, I have your slides up. If you'd like to come off mute and speak to them, please.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Bill, too. Very interesting presentation. And Carolina, your good stuff. So yes, I wanted to just give a bit of a perspective on collective effort and building common understanding. And just, thank you for this opportunity to speak. But also want to try to say something helpful for the topic. It's a big topic that we have heard about at some of our workshops in the past and have discussed in this proceeding a good bit, and one that doesn't have a simple answer. I think we're kind of all used to ideas that do not have a simple answer. So I just thought, what can I do for that? And just to maybe hopefully bring us one step closer, thought I would offer and share a concept that I learned about as an undergraduate. So hopefully I still retain my understanding, and we can at least just take it for what it is. And as an idea, what I'm really going for is sort of a unit of communication, maybe a simple unit of communication, not like a word, but more on the level of ideas. So I do just want to be clear, it's a general concept. Experimental research or experimental psychology isn't necessarily going to be used in that context, and also is not being used in the academic safety culture context. So please do not feel, if you use it yourself, please don't worry about that. And also going to give a little bit of background information, language from the proceeding. We've seen a little bit where we're kind of all revolving around the decision 2501-031. So a little bit on what kind of brings us all here and gives us a common purpose, kind of with that focus. Sarah, could we move to the next slide? Okay. Sorry, my notes are a little behind. Okay. So here if we're going to build common understanding on something, we need to agree on what it is and how to describe it before we can really describe the way it is. SPD has given us sort of a structure with the normative framework, very solid foundation. A lot of work went into building it, and pretty directly, at least as the first task. Our subgroup is fleshing that out by filling in examples. As we've reviewed frameworks over the past few years, we've seen that there are a lot of these frameworks share ideas on kind of a higher level. Often if you're comparing two of the frameworks, you're kind of working from the top down. So you're kind of starting with the traits, maybe the attributes and the examples. And just pointing out here that what we have is kind of a formal and very structured high level there. And what we're filling in is the things that kind of put it into practice in sort of day-to-day use or just actual operations over any term of any amount of time. So one way that I thought we could frame our task is to see the normative framework, the formal document, as an index. So an index would be a collection of terms that are used and a reference, the page number maybe where the term appears in a work. And we want to turn that into a glossary, which would include the same information, but would also include a brief description of what the term means in that particular work. So that could be a definition, like a definition you would find in a dictionary, or it could be a little more specialized. And of course, the way we are doing things, we have pretty broad latitude to specialize through our discussions with each other. But as long as we can agree on what the term means, then we can kind of make it what we want. So this is really similar to a concept I learned about a long time ago called an operational definition. Sorry, if we can move to the next slide. I think I've got the definition of it. Definition's not here. Don't worry, that will appear later. From this slide, please don't try to read that whole paragraph at the beginning unless you're very quick. Kind of just wanted to include the guiding principles here, and especially guiding principle 1. This is from the decision and just sets forth that one of our main purposes is to have a shared understanding of safety culture. And We will need to take a couple of steps to get there, and we want to make sure that we're on the same page while we do so. There is a reason, though, I included that paragraph. And I bolded the words translate and instill, because translating and instilling an idea from one person to another definitely require communication. But I think there's a bit of a distinction between the way those two ideas work that could be helpful to think about. So when we translate a term, we need to communicate to whoever we are translating it for. But that requires that we know what the term means. But it also requires that we know something about how the person we're speaking to may misinterpret or otherwise understand that term. So you got to think about your audience a little bit. And instilling also requires some thought about your audience. But it also kind of requires consistent effort. We think of instilling something over time, maybe repetitively. And consistency is a very important part of that we also have talked about in previous workshops. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So these are some of our definitions, not necessarily operational, actually called in the appendix. I thought I wrote down, I believe they're called explanations in the appendix, which is, this is what we are initially working with. I think that's just to point out that this is not strictly the same exact concept. But if we can move ahead, I'm going to come back to this slide briefly, so don't worry about the language too much. Here I wanted to just take some of those terms that are defined in our specific context and give a more general idea of what we might be more familiar with using them in. Specifically normative and norm from the normative safety culture framework. So I've got the definitions up there. What I just want to call attention to is, I think I'm really used to thinking of norm as the second definition. Principle of right action binding on members of a group, serving to guide, control, and regulate proper behavior. But one of the things that we are here to do is actually to imbue the framework, which already does have the authoritative power of the commission from appearing in a decision, but to imbue it with our own kind of, each of us, not me, but specifically, especially the people in leadership who are here, to imbue what we come up with even more authority. And kind of compare that to the previous slide, talking about translation and instilling. Both of those, especially instilling, are much easier to do from an authoritative position. So if we can move on to the next slide. This is an image that I'm sure we're all very familiar with. Just want to point to the interaction of moving parts here. So the terms would need to be commonly understood by people in the working group. And that's really kind of happening between the high level, the independent oversight organizations on the right, and really the whole organization itself on the left. Those of us in Cal Advocates, and I presume SPD, are very rarely talking to individual contributors, rarely talking to contractors. So that the nexus of understanding between those two, if it were to be direct, is not really the emphasis. We've got one emphasis on between organizations, and then another on from within an organization, which here is only really detailed in your companies and the utilities. But just a reminder that currently there may be a shared understanding within the utility itself. That's one thing that we would like to strengthen and measure. That's kind of a key part of this effort. But also part of the effort is between the oversight organizations and the utilities. And right now that is going to be a little bit more visible and easier to keep in mind. But I do think we need to just keep both of them in mind at all times to the extent we can. And kind of an acknowledgement there that is easier to do when you are part of the organization as opposed to being part of the independent oversight organizations. If we can move to the next slide. This one, I intended to click that link to slide 3. I don't know what kind of timing people would need to read that. So I think we'll just skip that. We did see the definition of safety culture earlier, I think in both Bill and Carolina's slides. And I've pulled out the part that I kind of wanted to focus on. So this is within the definition of safety culture, we have a lot of terms that are listed back to back, and that themselves, maybe somebody reading it could appreciate a definition or a distinction between them, which of course doesn't appear in the definition of safety culture. It would be kind of nestled and inefficient. But what I want to get at here is not actually to say that these are a checklist or would be usable as a checklist, but that really we've got multiple terms that in common speech might overlap in meaning, might have, some of these are very similar, some less so. But really they each do have a distinct definition when we're using them in any kind of operational context. And in any academic context, even different academic contexts are going to have different definitions for some of these. But by doing that, the definition is able to capture a wider range of values, principles, beliefs, norms, and attitudes, and so on, than it would if it had simply tried to pick the single term that covered the most bases or that covered the most specifically relevant bases. On this kind of higher up level, it really is helpful to have multiple ways to cover the base. If we can move to the next slide. This is kind of just to make that point, and we did see a few of these earlier. Other definitions of safety culture. I took this directly from one of Mark Fleming's workshop presentations, so I believe these are just the full text as they would appear for each of these organizations. And I'm not going to stay on it for too long, so please do not read all of it. But if you're able to pick out real quick, you'll see that, for example, the Pigeon 1991 lists beliefs, norms, attitudes, roles, and social and technical practices. Each of these definitions is trying to capture those same terms as in our values, principles, beliefs, norms, attitudes, behaviors, and practices. They're capturing kind of the same ideas or similar ideas and are doing those using different words. And you contrast that with the fact that a lot of work and a lot of thought did go into the words that we're using. So we really do need to not only give those words a lot of weight, but also really understand what it is that we are giving the weight to, and really make sure, kind of check in with each other to the extent we're able, which in our limited amount of time will be difficult. We can move to the next slide. This one I brought in. I really like the Swiss cheese model, and I really like the image that I will show you on the next page, showing the Swiss cheese model in an adapted to a more specific context. But I kind of brought this because this quote because it has a list in it. This one's a lot more distinct from a checklist, I think. It's more clear that they're trying to capture items that overlap possibly to an extent, but are very much more discrete and separate from one another. That's really all for the quote. If we could go on to the next page. So this did come, as you may be able to read if the text is large enough, from a presentation Dr. Mark Fleming gave at one of our workshops in 2022. I think nobody showed the Swiss cheese model image earlier in this meeting, but normally those red arrows, you can read production pressure, complacency, normalization of deviance, and tolerance of inadequate systems. Those are the CER, the 4 threats. I don't know whether Dr. Fleming made this presentation, what the context was for, if it was the workshop, because I know he was involved with those. But that just shows this is one way we can take a kind of common graphic that we have all seen a million times. And I actually did get a little bit of a kind of a flip in my mind and felt that I understood a little bit better what exactly the holes in the Swiss cheese are supposed to be when I looked at this. So, just one example, if it helps anybody else, but maybe even a suggestion that if we've got an idea and we want to adapt one idea to another, doing so with graphics that we have all seen a million times will make it potentially more accessible. If we could go to the next slide. So here's where I'll get into the operational definition, which again, kind of just borrowing this concept as a way of saying, really, it's worth the time to step back, think about whether the person we're speaking with is really registering exactly what we're saying, not whether they're accepting it, whether they're understanding it. And when that's not happening, having a tool, kind of an approach ready that we could kind of break that down and at least start getting to a common place. So operational definition really does apply to a lot of contexts. It's kind of just defining what it is you're trying to measure before you start measuring it. With this quote, I learned about this in college, and I didn't learn who had apparently first published it until putting this together. That supposedly is Stanley Smith Stevens. He's got a nice quote there. But if we can move on, I'll do one more psychology concept, and this one I really did include because I did not learn about it in college, but I did hear about it quite a few times, sometimes from Mark Fleming, Dr. Fleming. So again, please don't feel any need to read that top paragraph. The idea here is just items A through E. This is a quote from a professor, but what I liked was that items A through E here really do break down, starting with an idea that is in my head. And I think they chose fear for the quote because it's an emotion. You can think of it as any emotion or really any idea. You want to first think about what you really mean by that. And that, I think, in our case, would be writing the statement of operations to perform. So really writing down what about my idea can actually be communicated to others or tested or whatever. Of course, this is in an experimental context, so they're going for tested. But I think we could reduce that for our purposes to what we can actually communicate about it. So from there, you have empirical reference. These are what you're actually going to measure. Quantifications are how you're going to measure it. And those are two really important conditions in order to get to agreement. I think in the scientific method, you'd expect to repeat parts C and D potentially multiple times before reaching any single unit of scientific agreement. But just having something that's kind of a roadmap to overcoming a potential unshared understanding. Okay, so if we could go to the next slide. So this is kind of like a reminder that I'm really not trying to use this in exactly the way it's used in research psychology. And a reminder also that it's not calling these definitions. It's giving us a foundation to work with, really abstract ideas that are boiled down into something that we are using as a foundation to put into practice, as opposed to actually putting those definitions that appear in the framework into practice as they appear. I kind of put in that question at the end. Wasn't sure how the time would be, whether there'd be an interactive element, but if you're all okay with it, I will just go ahead and give one answer as for a definition in the framework that is less open to further interpretation or definition. Specifically, I would call out management of change, which is on that first page. It's LA5, which appeared as change management in the INPO framework. Did get some pretty heavy adaptation, and I think it demonstrates what I would hope that we don't need, but would hope to see if we do need. And that would, if you're looking for an example of that, I would just call your attention to the footnote on item LA5 in the framework. It's a somewhat lengthy footnote, but it does a good job of explaining what went into the adaptation and what it really means. So if we could go to the next slide. To bring us back to this proceeding, this is actually just a collection of sort of mandates or purview that was handed to the subgroup and the working group as a whole. And we can see there that building common understanding is kind of close to a quarter or so of the language that we have been directed towards through the order. So it's not the product. The product is the examples, at least the first product is. But I think it's going to be really important to making those examples useful. And I do think that while we need to make those on a pretty relatively quick timeline, all of our effort will be more valuable, and it really will go faster if we explain what we mean right when confusion arises, rather than potentially letting it linger for longer. If we could go to the next slide. This is kind of a reiteration of what I started on, but we need to, in order to understand what we're talking about, we need to have terms to describe it, and we need to be on the same page about all of that. SPD did give us the initial tool, but we have been tasked with creating strong, thorough, applicable, and actionable examples to close gaps. And I think there's challenges on both ends of that, but I do think that actionable is one that really has to come from at least an initial brainstorming. I think Cal Advocates is going to have a hard time suggesting those, and SPD might as well. That is really the role of the utility, or one of the key roles of the utilities. I think we will also have much more productive time spent if we're starting on a foundation of kind of ideas that were offered by the utility members in this working group. And of course, agreement is important. That's part of our charter. We've got our process for agreement, but really we do need to move forward together. And I hope that we are able to do that, not only believing we're doing so, but really actually knowing that we are. So the next slide is kind of our conclusion. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask. Comments, feel free to say them. Otherwise, I think we'll be turning this back to Sarah or Carolina. Not sure.
Back to me. Thanks, Ben. Does anyone have any questions for Ben on this section? And I did see that Carolina dropped in the chat the normative framework PDF, just so you all have that as a reference. But I don't see any questions.
I think
Hey,
Bill
Ben.
has his hands up.
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's all right. Just a quick question. Hey, Ben, I'm not sure if you thought about this on your presentation, but I was asking, from a common understanding, was there, as you were developing this and put some thoughts into it, did you have any thoughts around, common understanding on safety culture metrics or anything along that line at all?
I'll be honest, I hadn't been thinking about it. Yeah, I would.
I was just asking. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, so now we'll kind of get into the how we're going to be doing this. So thanks, Ben and Bill and Carolina, for really describing, that we have this normative framework that's been adopted by the commission, and we now have an understanding of why this collective effort is so important. So that way we are speaking the same language, we are communicating with each other, so that we can move forward together as a work group and use, this framework and the accompanying examples in the same aspects. So now we're really going to kind of be giving an update onto how the subgroup will fulfill part of the work plan. So we did form, you all formed the subgroup to complete this task, kind of on behalf of the working group. And I'll be sharing what we talked about and what we accomplished in our initial kickoff meeting. And then there will be an interactive portion at the end where I'm going to be sharing some of the survey results that we had and just ensuring that everyone on the call is aligned with what we had talked about as a subgroup. So to start off, within the subgroup, we will be creating, and we're in the process of creating, this charter document. So that way we can come back to kind of understanding what our North Star is, what we're going to be accomplishing together. So within the subgroup, we've identified and outlined our roles and responsibilities. So we have the subgroup co-leads, which are each of the IOUs and CalPA. And the IOUs have decided that instead of having one kind of subgroup lead out of them, they'll each be coming in as a co-lead together. So I think that's great. So each organization can, provide their information and their perspective. They will really be driving the content development, helping frame topics, making sure that we're creating coherent outputs, and then drafting content and sharing that with the full working group, with the goal of doing that hopefully at the September working group meeting that we'll be having together. Then beyond those co-leads, we'll be having other subgroup participants. So we're really relying on them for their expertise, providing utility content expertise, so that way we can draft these examples and ensure that they're practical in nature. And then obviously, SPD department will be, really providing the overall direction and oversight, much like Carolina shared today, and then also ensuring that what we're doing is aligning with the decision. And then as facilitators, like Michelle talked about, her and I will be really kind of facilitating those conversations, ensuring we're structuring the sessions in a way that we can really succeed within and creating these examples, but really relying on the subgroup participants to draft. As facilitators, we will not be authoring content or setting the direction. We're really trying to create an environment where each organization can bring their own ideas, so that way we can bring these examples to fruition. And what we talked about as the goal of the subgroup, which we've talked about a couple of times, but I really just want to hone in to what we're setting forth in that charter. The goal of the subgroup is to create these examples that tie back to the normative framework traits and attributes. So that way we are really supporting a shared understanding and can effectively implement the safety culture normative framework for all of you in your organizations and for others. That way, if they want to benchmark later, they can. And as Carolina said, the work is intended to translate these traits and attributes into clear, observable, and practical examples. So that way we are speaking the same language, like Ben said, and we can be consistent when we're talking across different groups together. So just as a kind of, if we go back at a higher level to bring it all together, the goal of this group will be to create examples for each of these attributes that are within the safety culture framework. So when you see this, you can kind of, it highlights that there are 40 attributes. So it's a lot of work, it's a lot of undertaking, and we understand that. So we're trying to create, like I said, an environment within the subgroup that we can actually do this. And how we're doing that is really understanding that it's a safe space. We want there to be open discussion. We want it to really be collaborative and have a collective effort, so that way we can build these understandings and really creating a dynamic where there is shared learning and everyone, is working with transparent communication. But that's really the foundation of what the subgroup is doing. And even though it's going to be maybe high pressure and a tight timeline, we really want to make sure that we're coming back to doing this because we're in this together and we're trying to, create a set of examples that, all of the stakeholders can use. So as we talked about in our subgroup meeting, and as, Bill kind of outlined from the NRC framework, that was adapted to create the normative framework that we'll be using. But the NRC framework does have examples. So one of the approaches we talked about was kind of referencing that framework and other frameworks and their examples to really kind of have a baseline understanding. So like Ben said, ensuring that we're actually understanding what that example is saying and what we're trying to communicate and accomplish by using that example. And then for this group, it's really important that we'll be asking the translation question. So what does that example, say in the nuclear industry, actually look like in utility operations? Does it actually make sense for how you all will be using it for your audiences? And then from there, we'll be drafting the industry specific examples. And we'll be doing that in a set of sessions. So we'll have several sessions between now and with the goal of September, having a draft set of examples. And that's how we'll be working through it, through each of those attributes, which later I'll talk about how we'll be prioritizing those. You might be asking, okay, it sounds great, right? But how are you actually going to do this? How are you going to reach consensus when each of the stakeholders coming to the meetings have their own set of motivating factors, right? They all have their own perspectives that they're bringing in. So before any decisions are final, before we have any actual examples that are set, we'll be polling the group. We're really going to try to stay in touch with what the group is doing and have the group drive those discussions. We'll be documenting it. So after we have an example, as facilitators, we'll ask, does that capture it? Is that actually what we're trying to say? We'll expect the group to provide a response. We'll record that. Understand the distribution and also the comments. And we're going to keep that really transparent. So we do have, kind of a repository of all of our documents and everything that we'll be doing. So that way all participants in the subgroup can see what we're actually noting. We're also going to keep tabs if there are any concerns. So, we understand that, not everyone will agree all the time, and that's fine, right? That's where we have points of growth where we can learn from each other, from their perspectives. But if there are concerns, we really do want to document that and note that. So maybe someone does like the example, but they just want to note, hey, maybe it could be a little bit better, or maybe it would be better if it was said in this perspective or this way. We'll be keeping notes of that. We want to really create an open and honest, environment while we're doing this. And then, as we saw in the subgroup kickoff, sometimes we talk about out of scope items or something we want to come to later. We're also going to be keeping kind of a parking lot or a virtual parking lot. So that way we do have that. Maybe it's something we come to later. Maybe it's something that we talk to SPD about, having it as a focus area later, but keeping that separate so that way we really can stay on task for this subgroup. So that's kind of how we're going to be doing it. And during that kickoff meeting, we did recognize that everyone is very busy. It is a big job that we're going to be doing with maybe a potentially tight timeline. So we did ask, it came out of the group that we wanted to create a survey to kind of poll and understand the priorities. So looking at all of the traits and attributes, were there some that we should focus on first, or were there some that people found more important than others? Just so we had a starting point as we got into that first drafting session, which we'll be scheduling soon. That way we kind of had a focused approach and knew where we were going to be going. So I will tell you now, this is where the interactive portion will come in. So we sent out a survey. Sent out a survey to the subgroup attendees or participants. We got those results back, and we'll be sharing those now. But I will be asking some questions about whether or not you all as the working group feel aligned, have questions or anything like that. So I'll be sharing those, and then there will be Slido questions that will come up, I believe, on the right side of your screen, and you'll be able to note what your response is there. So the first question that we asked the subgroup members was really around the traits. So looking at the normative framework traits, there's 10 of them. We asked the attendees or the participants to rank the traits in priority order from 1 to 10. So I don't expect you to have these memorized, but I did want to provide as a refresher, these are the 10 traits that we're going to be focusing on. So these are each of the 10. The results showed that leadership safety values, decision-making, environment for raising concerns, and continuous learning were repeatedly the top traits that they wanted to prioritize. So as you can see, you'll see a score there. So the closer the score is to 10, that means it was most important. So leadership safety values came out on top, which, I think it's to be expected with what we've been talking about. And we're also sharing the percent in which respondents ranked it in the top 3. So leadership safety values ranked 79% of the respondents, which there were 12, ranked it in the top 3, followed by decision making and so on. So what I want to ask you all is, here's the first poll. It might take us some time to figure this out together, but I want to ask, do the subgroup priority traits align with yours? So do you also agree that your top traits that you're most interested in prioritizing are the leadership safety values, decision-making, environment for raising concern, and continuous learning? So if we could launch that Slido poll.
Do you see them?
I do not, but as long as the attendees do, that's great.
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, perfect.
It's in the chat.
I don't see it on my end, Harjeet.
I launched them.
Can others see it? Maybe.
Yeah, I
It's
can
in
see
the-
it.
I think
chat.
host or sub-host, they don't see that.
Okay.
Yeah,
explains.
I'm seeing it in the little box on the bottom, the Slido panel.
Yeah. So people who are host or co-host, they don't see. I don't see them. I mean,
Okay.
I see them like I'm launching, but I don't have
I
option
see
to.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
So
see
I'll
it.
just need maybe Michelle, you can share the results as they come in so that way we can discuss them since I'm not able to see it.
So to see the results, I need to close the voting. So we'll make sure everybody responds to that. I have seven
Okay.
votes so far.
Okay. So maybe take a moment. If you haven't responded yet, go ahead and respond. And I would like to say, if you disagree with the priorities, please note it. There's a question. The second question is, if no, could you please share why? And at the end of kind of the survey recap, we'll also have an open discussion, so that way we can kind of discuss what your priorities would be.
Hi, Sarah. Can you all hear me? This is Oge.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to suggest for those who can see the Slido, go next to the three dots next to chart and click on that, and that should pull it up for those who can see it. If you go on the chat at the bottom of your screen, there are three little dots, and when you hover your mouse over that, it says more panels. Click on that and you see the Slido.
But it should pop up on the screen for people actually, right? So
Yeah.
yeah.
But that's how I found my
Yeah.
help everyone else. Thank you.
Okay, so have we had more people respond?
Yeah, we have 11 votes.
Hey,
Hi,
hey,
I'm
Sarah.
sorry, this is Jen
Sarah,
Garlock. I clicked on those three dots next to the chat and I'm not getting an option for Slido, so I am still unable to find it.
Okay, so I think
You can
maybe
you can also
go ahead.
so you can also open the apps um, um, button next to the participant panel, and it should show you the apps that are available when it's Slido.
Okay,
I
I
was
found
also
it.
going to
Thank you.
recommend, if people aren't able to see it,
great.
just so we don't get too hung up on it, you can also put it in the chat. So if you believe, the subgroup trait priorities align with what you would say, you can say yes, no, somewhat, or unsure in the chat as well. And we could look at it that way.
Yeah, people still working on it. People are typing
Okay.
right now, typing because there is a open-ended question on open text, so people have take some time to type. So far the votes are going up. There is 16 votes so far, 17.
Great.
Yep. How many people are attendees? How many total attendees we have?
There are 37.
37. So we're halfway.
Okay.
18 votes so far.
So I'm going to go back to, maybe people are having a hard time remembering what the results were too. So I'll go back on this slide just so that way you can compare.
And just a reminder, in the chat, I've put the link to the traits so that if you need to see the whole list again, it's there.
Give people another minute or two, since this is the first one. Expect it to be rocky, and then hopefully we can figure it out together on the next few.
Yeah, people are working on it. Actually, I see the progress. But again, sometimes it takes time. How much people type. So there is if it's simply like clicking on choice, then it would just go quickly. Right now, people have to type, then it takes time.
Yeah, and if you would prefer, instead of typing, if you feel comfortable to, you can always come off mute and talk about what you're typing as well. Just want to provide the best mode that you all prefer. Okay, so how are we doing on responses now?
20.
Okay. Do we think
Maybe
that's good enough? And I think too, like I said, we
maybe
will have, go ahead.
sorry. Maybe the answer like asking why is share why not. Maybe people can respond for later or something, because if you simply just click on it, it's gonna go quickly. Otherwise, it's gonna take time. Because
Yeah, that's what I,
every survey has this open text, and that will slow us down.
okay,
Thanks,
so yeah, I
Harjeet.
was going to provide a reminder too that we do have 20 minutes of open discussion, like I said. So I think it would be great if you would prefer to talk about it. We can talk about it during that open discussion and just kind of maybe make a note to yourself, and that's how we can handle it there. But
Yeah.
if people are not comfortable with openly speaking, I would maybe like you to put it in the chat then to kind of speed this up.
Yeah, so in the
So
polls, maybe it will only answer the first question, basically, right?
sounds great. So could
Yeah.
someone share the results with me since I'm not able to see it?
I need to close voting. I just closed the voting.
So we're closing voting, everybody. And put your comment in the chat, and Harjeet will share results with you, Sarah.
Yeah, so the results, I don't know. Do you see the results? Somebody?
I don't think so.
No, Harjeet.
Oh, okay, just a minute. Let me see.
And apologies, everybody. This is kind of, we're launching a poll for somebody else, and there's a little bit of logistics there that we probably need to work out.
So I do see the results. Actually, I can speak actually right now because I don't know how to share them. So yes, 85%. No,
Perfect.
0%, and somewhat 15%. So basically
Awesome. I
two
think that's great.
categories. Yeah, two categories. Yes, and somewhat. Yeah, yes, 85, somewhat 15.
Great. Okay. Thanks so much, Harjeet, for working through that with us. Thank you
Harjeet,
so
can
much for
put it
being.
in the... Sorry, Sarah. I was just going to suggest that Harjeet, if you might just put that in the chat so that Sarah and everyone else can see it.
Yeah. Let me do that. Just a minute.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So it seems like we have a majority of people are agreeing, and I think that's great. I honestly don't expect for everyone to have 100% because we are working with a larger group, but I think it's good that we do have 85%. So the next question, hopefully this one goes a little bit better. The next question that we had were around prioritizing the attributes. So we understand that maybe from a trait perspective, leadership safety values were the most important thing, which we understand, but we also wanted to look at it from the attribute perspective, since we will be writing examples for each of these attributes. So that way we can understand as a subgroup where we want to start. So we asked the subgroup members, we provided the list, and we asked them to choose their top 10. So top 10 out of all attributes, regardless of the trait that it belongs to. And like Carolina said, she shared the normative trait framework with you as well. So you could always pull that up if you would like to have a refresher or a reminder. So we asked the group what their top 10 were, and there were 7 clear attributes that were selected by at least 42% of the respondents. So beyond this grouping, responses were broadly distributed, and there were no clear separation across the other remaining 33 attributes. So on this chart, really focusing in on the top 7, where almost half of the people agreed that these were their top priorities. But what's interesting, or what's good, I guess, it does correlate with what we found in the first question, was that 4 of these 7 were actually attributes tied to the leadership safety value and action trait. So again, we're kind of confirming what we had talked about in the first one, that trait or that bucket is what we as a subgroup should be prioritizing first as we look at these examples. So for the top attributes, the beyond leadership safety values and actions, also 2 were within the questioning attitude portion, and then another looking at the respectful work environment. But overall, these attributes looked at things like leader behaviors, resources, avoiding complacency, a strategic commitment to safety, high level of trust, field presence, and then challenging assumptions. So, what I would like to ask you all in the poll is, do the subgroup priority attributes align with yours? Oh, and I am now seeing Slido on mine, so that's cool. So now asking you, do the priority attributes align with what you think should be prioritized? And again, instead of answering why, we can talk about that in the open discussion. So if you could take a moment, look at these results, refresh yourself with the attributes, and then respond. And I understand this is a quick, we're trying to do this in a short amount of time. So if you need more time, that's what we'll use the open discussion for.
Hey, Sarah, this is Bill.
Yeah.
I noticed the traits are different colors. Do they mean anything, or is just formatting?
So I'm just highlighting that the ones that are blue are the leadership, safety, values, and actions tied to that trait. The ones that are green are the questioning attitude trait. And then that kind of coral color is the respectful work environment. So just highlighting the distribution within the traits.
Okay, so formatting for easy to see. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's it.
And also something that I didn't talk about, but I can now, is that I think it really shows how important the subgroup is holding leader behaviors, because 75% of the subgroup of the 12 people that responded, they did choose that attribute as one of their top choices. So how is Slido looking? Is it better this time? Perfect.
We're at 16 currently, Sarah.
Great. Thank you.
How is everybody can see the questions well? Very good. Very good. All right.
Now at 18.
Great. We'll give people a couple more minutes.
$19.
I think
And
once we get over 20, we can call it.
And as you mentioned, I think for instance, for the last poll where it was 85 yes and 15 somewhat, I think for the 15%, we can use the time during the discussion portion to hear, what those what the somewhat is. And we are at 20 now.
Great. So can we go ahead and close the poll and share the results with the group? I'm not able to see the results, so again, we'll just have to share those in the chat.
No, I'm gonna do that right now. So I'm saying yes, 70% and somewhat 30%, and I will put in the chat right now.
Perfect. So 70% are in agreement, and 30% are somewhat. I'm glad that no one is just outright saying no. So that already shows that we're kind of working through this together, and at least in somewhat of that common understanding. So we can talk about. Go ahead.
Sorry, I think that makes sense as well, because there were so many more attributes than traits, so there's more room for questions, if you will.
Yep. Okay, so the next set of questions were less about the specific traits and attributes and how we should prioritize those, and more about creating that common understanding of how we're going to be using the examples and who will be using them. So the next question we asked the subgroup was around their intended use of the example. So how do they actually intend as an organization to use these examples that we will be creating together? So we had about 5 themes that came out of it. We did have 12 people respond to this, I believe. So really around building the shared understanding of safety culture concepts and terminology. Also wanting to be consistent in how we interpret the framework. The ability to have benchmarking and continuous improvement over time. Also informing regulatory and executive decision making, and then reducing duplication of effort across organizations. So kind of the working smarter, not harder aspects. That way we're all building this together. So this is how the subgroup intended to use the examples that we will be drafting. So now, again, I would like to ask you all, do your intended uses align with the subgroup? And like we've said, if your response is no or somewhat, we can talk about that later in the open discussion.
Can you also see the live results?
Yes, very nice.
Yep, now I'm able to.
Yep. So making improvement step by step.
Yep. We got a clapping from Bill. Thanks, Bill.
So I close at 20.
I think that sounds good.
Well, seems to be holding steady at 16 at the moment. Sarah?
Maybe let's just go ahead and close it with that. People will have opportunities to talk about it later.
Well, yes, 81.
Okay.
Somewhat 13, unsure 6.
Okay. And I think that's a a good understanding or what we would expect here too. Especially with the unsure, because maybe you haven't talked about that as an organization yet. So I think that's totally fine. If you want to put those in the chat, we'll move on to the next one. I think this is one of the last polls. We have maybe 1 or 2 more. So the next question was around the outputs. So how do you intend for the outputs? We talked about how you intend for them to be used. Now we want to talk about who will be the audience of these actual examples. So for your organization, who do you think will be actually using these examples? So the subgroup said quite a broad audience, which I think that just really kind of speaks to the nature of how these examples really have to be practical and need to be, usable from a broad perspective of who may be reading them and using them. So the subgroups responded with this group, also CPUC, the IOU boards and executive teams. Other audiences included internal compliance, frontline employees, which I think is great. So that way you can kind of talk about what this actually means. and then public advocates, and also organizations looking to benchmark. So I think that's great. You know, if we build these examples in a way that other organizations can use and improve their safety culture as well. So another poll. Does your intended audience align with the subgroups? So I will go back and refresh your memory on those.
Hey, Sarah, this is Bill. So I'm looking at poll number 4, and the yes button doesn't have a green circle. I don't know if that's just me. Only ones with green circle is no, somewhat, and unsure.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing, Bill.
Okay.
Okay. So maybe if you would put yes, just put that in the chat.
Okay, gotcha.
Thank you, Bill, for finding that. I see lots of yeses in the chat, so that's great. So right now I'm seeing 10 yeses in the chat. And then I think we had maybe 5 or 6 that have responded already. I think that aligns with our 16 or so that we had. So we could probably close that one.
Okay. Closed.
Okay. So what are the percentages for the no, somewhat, or unsure?
Well, since
It's probably going to show like 100, show high, right?
No, since yes was like a voted in chat, so I have a somewhat 80 and unsure 20. So
we can calculate that later on the actual.
Yeah. So I'm gonna put
spread.
that the way it is right now, so you can figure it out later.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it looks like we have 10 yeses and probably 5 or 6 that are others. So
yeah, that's right.
Thank you. And then the last question was really around the subgroup's desired value and outcomes. So what do they hope to accomplish with this subgroup and by establishing these examples? And it really kind of came down to 2 things. Participants hope this effort builds a shared language and common understanding, which I think is great that we're all understanding that, especially since it was in the charter. And also wanting this to lead to more consistent, credible assessments, stronger collaboration, and a clearer connection between safety culture insights and real performance outcomes. So I'd like to ask you all, promise this is the last one. Do your desired outcomes align with the subgroups? So are you hoping to build a shared language and also, improve consistency and collaboration?
This is the last poll.
Thank you.
13 votes so far.
Do we think we have the majority?
We have unanimous. Oh no, now we shifted.
Oh.
It used to be 100, but so far, but now, so far 94 and 6.
Awesome.
90.
I think we can go ahead and close it.
Yeah. Okay. So 94% yes, somewhat 6%.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for participating, engaging, and also being patient with us as we figure this out. We will, whether it's through Slido like this or other modes, we do really hope to kind of use some of these polling features to create engagement and ensuring that we have alignment across the group. So with that, I know we have been promising it, but really kind of wanted to open up to open discussion for you all. So whether it is, thoughts or questions about the subgroup and how we'll be doing things, or talking about, the survey results and maybe why you didn't choose a yes. Would really like to open it up to the group. And Michelle and I will be here just to answer questions and also just kind of help facilitate the conversation. Thanks. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that way we can all see each other.
Sarah, all the results are in the chat, so you guys can capture those for your processing.
Perfect.
Processing, right? Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And the poll before 5 is actually 4, not 3. So my typo mistake.
It's okay. We'll figure it out.
Yeah. So
Thanks.
there are 2 3s actually. The last 3 is actually 4. So they should flow in order.
Okay.
Yeah.
And just to reiterate what Sarah said, we really want to use this time, one, to answer any questions you have, but also we want to make sure that we're hearing you. And if you have thoughts about suggestions for improvement, or especially on the polls, if you indicated somewhat or that you're unsure, if you have feedback, we'd love to hear it on things that maybe we should consider as we're moving forward with the process. So we want to have just an open dialogue. So feel free to speak up or raise your hand or throw a question or comment in the chat if you'd like.
Yeah, Bill.
Hey, I'm recalling that as part of the survey, there was a question around meeting sequence and length of the meeting. Have we made a decision on that yet?
Yeah, so we did. I was going to share that afterwards since it didn't pertain to the whole working group, but we did come out that the subgroup would like to meet once a month for 3 hours, which I think is great. So that way we have a set time and we can hopefully get quite a lot accomplished in those 3 hours. And we would have a couple of those before the September meeting. But following this call, after we've talked to the SPD group, we will be sending out a poll to that group early next week, so that way we can understand which date and time would be best to start that cadence of meetings.
Thank you.
Sarah, you have another hand up, and that's Rich.
Perfect, Rich. Sorry, I'm not able to see raised hands.
No worries, I'll look for you.
Completely understand. It's hard to multitask. I have that challenge too. So I have a couple of questions, comments, I guess. One would be on one of the first polls of ranking and prioritizing for both the 2 polls. We saw basically the top of the list, and we didn't see the bottom of the list. And so I wanted to make sure that, or to, I guess, ask the question about, all the traits have some importance, and I don't want to forget about the ones at the bottom. And so I think we've established a priority where there's a lot of consensus, but at the same time, the ones at the bottom are still part of the traits that we're looking at. And so I want to I guess to make sure we think about the ones that are still at the bottom, even though they're not necessarily priorities for the subgroup.
Yeah, I think that's an important point, and I'm glad you said that, Rich. We definitely kind of did this survey so that way we knew where to start on that first meeting, right? Because right now it kind of feels like we're boiling the ocean, and we need to try to figure out which buckets we're going to focus on first. So I think in that first subgroup meeting, we can really kind of talk about how we want to prioritize those traits. You know, from the results and from this group, we're hearing that the leadership safety values were the most important. So maybe we start there, get through those, but then we can come up with a prioritized, look at all of the traits and attributes, because we, like you said, we do want to create examples for all of them. So we're not going to forget those for sure, but as a group, we can kind of think about how we want to look at those. But I would like to really kind of ask the working group that said somewhat, what are some of those other traits or attributes that are important to you? So that way we take that into consideration moving forward.
Sarah, perhaps you can share the slide where you had the 3 or the 4 top traits so that everybody knows.
Let me get that back up. Hold on a second.
And also, I know it's a lot of information that we're asking you to go back and forth from from the initial document that has the descriptors. So if you don't have a chance to really process that in this meeting, feel free to reach out to us via email to give us any feedback that you're not able or ready to provide today. We just want to make sure that we're hearing all of the voices possible.
Yeah, so you should be seeing this slide. And just as a refresher, the way the subgroup had thought about it was maybe these were the ones that we would focus on the examples for these traits first. So if there are others that you think that we should, not that we'll be missing them at all, but maybe really kind of hone in on those as well, please share those so that way we know.
And Rich, did you say you had a second question?
Yes, I had a second question, and it was related to, I think, the question regarding who's the intended audience. And I thought that list was fairly comprehensive. And there's one thought I had, and I'm not sure what people think, but I'll just raise this as a question, is that it didn't talk about kind of public facing uh, um, ability for the attributes to be shared and the examples to be shared. And I'm wondering if there's some thought that should be included about how all of our organizations can reach out to the public and use this as an example of what we're doing with regard to safety culture, so that we can talk to ratepayers about what this effort is about. Utilities can talk to their customers about what this effort is about in some way. So I'm just wondering if there's a public facing audience as well.
I think it's a great question and a great consideration, Rich. And while it didn't come up in the survey, I think it's something that we probably need to consider. So I'd be interested in hearing feedback from anyone in this meeting. But it's also something that we can add to our list to include in the discussion for the next working group meeting. But is there any feedback or thoughts from folks on this call?
So you're probably going to be moving on to the next question, but I thought raising problem identification and resolution was sort of, if we're thinking about prioritization and maybe the next level, I think there is a big opportunity for problem ID and resolution to be in here as part of a first step towards continued learning before you have a full system that can capture everything. I think problem ID and resolution is a pretty fundamental one to build on.
So, and I'm just circling back to make a note. Rich, to your second question, hearing no feedback from the group, we'll make sure that we include that as part of the agenda in the next session to get feedback from the team. And we can think through some examples prior to that to begin the conversation with.
Okay, so coming back to the traits that we had originally talked about, I don't want to belabor it, but I do want to give people an opportunity to talk about what other traits they think that we should be prioritizing as we draft these examples. And I know that this is just showing what the subgroup chose, so I'll go back and share the 10 traits so you can see those as well. And I see that, Carolina, you noted problem identification and resolution, so we can note that as well. Anyone else in the group, though?
Hey, Sarah, this is Bill. So
Yep.
I'm asking a clarifying question. Are we not developing examples for all 10?
We are. We will
Okay.
be developing examples for all, but in the subgroup kickoff, we had talked about, this is a lot to do and just a couple of meetings. So we did want to look at which ones we should prioritize first. So that way, if this effort does extend into the fall, we can at least talk about the examples that are most important to people in the September meeting. So this is where our focus would start in our next subgroup meeting.
Okay, so discussion on priority is just in case we don't get it all done. That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah.
Okay, and then
And
maybe
some could say, if they are more important, maybe that'd be an easier place to start because maybe your organization has already been thinking about these things as well.
Okay. And, I would offer that this doesn't have to be one and done discussion. I think we can do a check and adjust, at the first meeting and even at the second one. So I would offer that. That's it.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And just as a reminder, within this group, the polling on alignment for the 4 priorities, we had 85% agreed, but we did have 15% who said somewhat. So for the 15% who said they somewhat agreed with that priority, we'd really like to hear, what that gap is, and if there's something that we should consider going into the next meeting.
And Sarah and Michelle, I just want to do a quick time check and seeing that we have some of the intent is to work through all of the questions, all of the traits, just some matter of which ones do we work through first and have ready. Given that we only have a few minutes left, perhaps we can go to the latter questions to gather some feedback on those items.
Definitely. So where would you like to, I guess, hone our conversation in with the last few minutes? Or does the group have any questions for potentially the subgroup or the co-leads?
In terms of feedback on prioritizing attributes for which examples will be developed, I don't have specifics. I was just going to suggest that in Ben's presentation, he noted there might be some aspects of the normative traits that are clearer than others or could use more definition than others. And a place to consider starting might be ones that are less clear, like in the framework, which attributes are not as clear how it would be implemented. Those might be ones where it might be most productive to come up with those examples first if they need the most clarification or guidance.
I think that's a great point, Jen. And I think too, as like Carolina said, we do have to wrap up this soon. But as you're kind of looking at this content afterwards and reflecting on the meeting, definitely feel free to send Michelle or I your notes on things that maybe aren't clear, or what if your organization would like, more understanding around, and we'll take that into consideration for the upcoming subgroup meetings. But we really want this to be open communication, so that way we can, fulfill expectations and goals. Thanks, Jen. Okay, any other questions or comments? If you don't want to come off mute, you can always put it in the chat. So I guess with that, Carolina, should we pass it over to you to wrap up?
Thank you, Sarah and Michelle. Yes, I just want to make sure we have enough time to end on time and for folks to go have lunch today. I know it's Friday, and and we've just happened to be landing on our meetings on Fridays, and it looks like we will be landing on Friday for the rest of the year with our session. So I want to make sure we end on time. We will be taking a 10-minute break. So let's meet back at 11:26. So please make sure everybody's back here at 11:26.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Interest. Thank you, Eleanor. And just in the interest of ensuring everybody gets to their destinations timely, lunch or otherwise, I think we can go ahead and get started. But just want to make sure you guys can see my presentation. So just a minute. Okay, everybody's seeing the slides? Okay, great. So as we're moving on to the second section, and it's not entirely related to the examples, but it is somewhat related, and you'll see why. I think Bill actually touched on this a little bit with the continuous improvement cycle. And so as we near our first assessment, which will start by August 1st of this year, and it will be on SDG&E. We want to introduce the group to some of the concepts and processes that we at the Commission have been working on and applying the last 4 to 5 years as a result of, one, the OIR, but also an investigation into SoCalGas's safety culture. So these are particularly relevant in preparing everyone on what assessment results mean, translating those into improvement and action. At the end of the day, assessments are intended for improvement. And so we need to continue to put centering in the conversation into that piece. So it's actually the most challenging part of, at least from our experience, has been, and what we observed from the organization, SoCalGas in this case, is translating assessment results to action, and that is quite challenging. You might be familiar with this particular cycle, but phase 1 of the decision that established this working group, the framework and everything else, included a continuous improvement cycle under Appendix A. So this cycle reflects the Commission's support and understanding that creating and maintaining a positive safety culture is a continuous and ongoing process of intentional effort rather than a one-time or discrete effort. And I think this is kind of the general theme that we are trying to convey. The improvement cycle is based on the PDCA, or Plan, Do, Check, Act principle of continued improvement, which is a well-known approach for improvement and managing change. And the utilities, and those of you who are familiar with management system, is also a core principle that is embedded in how management systems essentially work. The cycle itself, the one you see on the screen, which was on the decision, was inspired by the work of the Canadian Energy Regulator, and you can find that their cycle in their assessment guidelines. So the figure in the slide is overlaid with the specific assessment and improvement and monitoring tools that were adopted by the Commission with the Safety Culture Assessment Framework. One thing to keep in mind, and it's very important, is that the Commission highlighted that these tools in the framework are they're only a part of the toolkit for safety culture. And the IOUs, should be employing other tools and everything else they need to contribute in this continued improvement process. So the cycle consists of 4 phases. The assessment phase, and that phase is what we're entering with SDG&E. I would say SDG&E is entering, and that's where the IOU is assessed to gather insights into the state of their current safety culture, essentially to gather those underlying beliefs that are driving the culture. Then is the plan development phase. And in that second quarter, you see that this is where plans and actions get developed in response to whatever an assessment tells you. So an assessment is giving you a picture, an insights of what your culture is like. The assumption is that there will be a response to use that to improve. And then after those are created, you enter into a monitoring and tracking and improvement phase where whatever interventions have been developed are implemented and they're monitored and tracked. We have another tool that the Commission included as part of the Safety Culture Assessment Framework, which are those annual self-evaluations of improvement. And at this stage, that's where those are performed. But again, those are minimums. This is just what the Commission has in the framework, but it's explicit that these are just part of the toolkit. After, when you assess and when you monitor, you're gathering feedback, and then you enter an evaluative phase, and the cycle will continue on and on. But the insights that are monitored and tracked of the activities and interventions that are put in place are used to refine the plans and the interventions or the actions in the years in between assessments, so that there can be improvement in the event things are not working, or the interventions that are put in place might not be yielding what was expected. And finally, after going through the cycle for 3 years, and you enter in the 4th year, you enter another cycle, and it all starts all over again. So now we'll take a closer look at what happens in the 2nd quarter and 3rd quarters of this cycle. So we're talking about the plan and actions and monitoring and improvement, and to some extent the refinement phases of this cycle. I would say that we've touched a lot upon the assessment methodology, but there might be need to do a little bit more of that as we get closer to SDG&E's assessment. So just to refresh everybody's memory. Okay, so part of those phases of the developing plans is actually translating the assessment results into action, and which is, as I mentioned, one of the most significant steps and possibly the most challenging one of the process, because it's very different. So interpreting assessment results and responding to them, it actually looks different to what we've all been doing in the past, the Commission, what the utilities do, and what most organizations are used to doing and seeing. And that process predetermines the potential success of the organization at improving its culture. Just as a reminder, safety culture is an abstract concept, so it cannot be measured directly. So when we talk about indicators, we're not talking about measuring culture directly. The assessor, what they're doing is, and this is the graphic that some of you might have seen in past presentations. So they're making skillful interpretations of the visible manifestations of the culture. So these are the multiple data points that you see to the right of the slide in the graphic as focus groups, interviews, document analysis, and all that. You see that how those generally remain to the surface of this iceberg, and that those are relatively visible manifestations of the culture. And they do that. They interpret these data. It's a complex process. A lot of thought and a lot of effort goes into this to gain insight into what's happening underneath the surface. Basically, the subconscious assumptions and beliefs that are driving the organization's culture. All of that is invisible and underneath the surface. Those drivers are represented here by the red gear in the iceberg model of culture in this graphic. So, I'll repeat again, this is Edgar Schein's model for culture, and using it here to represent it. So we can also refer to, as I mentioned earlier, it's what's below the surface as everything that's invisible. And through this data analysis, the assessor will develop themes, will develop insights as to what's happening underneath the surface or invisible, under the waterline. For many organizations, I included all the stakeholders here who are outside of the utilities, it will be very tempting to take the items at the surface and address them instead of looking and addressing what's driving those visible items. But the reality is that that would be a mistake, because the focus is to work with the themes of what's going on underneath the surface. If you don't work and address them at that deepest level, organizations are not going to improve. One way to put it is that this would be akin to addressing a symptom, such as a headache or something of the like, rather than the root issue, say blood pressure. That will not result in lasting change. In fact, addressing the symptoms can even send the organization in the wrong direction. So this is really important, because there is a temptation to take these visible things, or for example, something like an example of the traits, and say, this is something we address it, and you immediately go into action without really understanding what's driving all of it. So here is an illustration of what the process looks like to translate assessment results into actual action. And this was illustrated by Dr. Mark Fleming. He is now on the call, so hopefully if he is able to chime in later, would be great. And I know he was mentioned earlier in Ben's presentation, so if there's any question around that, we have him today. So this was applied in the so-called gas safety culture investigation. And so those of you who have followed along there are probably familiar with this process. The first step is for the utility to understand the assessment results. It might seem counterintuitive. So you'd be wondering, what else is there really to understand if the report already contains the results and they're asked to provide the underlying drivers, right? As in not just the drivers, but the beliefs, the underlying beliefs that are driving behavior. But the process of understanding why the culture is the way it is from the utility's perspective will be critical, because if the understanding is lacking or it isn't deep enough, the utility will not be able to identify interventions or actions that can effectively address the issue. And I'll give some examples on this a little bit later. So to develop that understanding, the utility will need to engage staff across its organization. Once understood, the organizations should work collaboratively with the same group of people in its organization to design the interventions, which is really about answering what needs to be done differently to address the underlying drivers. Eventually, a plan or a roadmap or something more concrete should be created based on the understanding of the results from the collaborative process. That will likely range of initiative. It'll be a range of initiatives or activities and actions. And at that point, a set of indicators should be created that will help the organization understand whether they are moving in the right direction or they are straying from the direction they intended to go. So this is a very important aspect of the process. Basically, the organization should be able to describe why they are doing that intervention, why they've selected a specific action, and explain the impact it expects to have on a specific aspect of culture, not culture generally. So here's what we think will change, and here is how we'll know that we're moving into the right direction. And I'm saying this not from the regulatory perspective. I'm just saying this as a general approach to developing anything related to your safety culture improvement. It's being able to verbalize and really for yourselves understand why you're doing what you're doing and being able to link it directly to that objective, and what you're finding or what you're being told or what you're learning from an assessment and from your insights is something you need to address. So at this point, indicators, what this means is that the indicators need to be specified before implementing any of these initiatives. At that point, you have your indicators and whatnot, and the initiatives are implemented. And the indicators are then used to monitor and make changes and adapt based on what the indicators are telling you and what you're seeing and the effectiveness of the intervention. And this is done over and over again in an iterative fashion. Dr. Fleming actually uses a helpful, at least that I found pretty helpful, and have shared it myself in other conversations, is to explain this, and it's pretty much like sailing, going from an initial understanding, beginning the process like sailing a boat. So you are heading in a certain direction, but really you don't navigate in a straight line from point A to point B, sort of like you would potentially with a motorboat. The reality is that the wind, the current, tides change. So we maneuver the boat, change direction. And while you know where you'd like to be, and this is, your objective, where you'd like to go, you can't always get there as directly as you'd like. So the indicators become really important as you set off with a plan. The plan is the best guess, but you'll likely find it is not as effective as you'd like, and you need to change course. So the indicators provide the data of whether you need to change course. So the plan and the process needs to be adaptable. And for that to be possible, there needs to be good indicators to know if you're moving in the right direction and understand whether and what particular initiatives is having an intended impact. The indicator needs to be closely coupled to the initiative so that it can measure whether this action is what's influencing that particular aspect of culture as intended, and not something else that you're doing, but that particular action. So you know what influence you're having and why. So this is important because indicators don't tell us whether safety culture has improved. They don't measure culture directly. In this case, what we're trying to show you is that they help us understand whether initiatives that have been designed to improve safety culture are having the intended effect. The process needs to be built on a foundation, and that's also depicted at the bottom of the slide. Some of these include, like, there needs to be internal expertise to guide the improvement. The leaders need to understand what culture is and what process is about. There needs to be a broader understanding amongst the leadership team and the workforce in general about what they are doing, what they're trying to do, and how and why. And the senior leaders need to be committed to improvement. I think that that's a very key point. This will be very, very important. Also, in this, we learned, as well as we went through this process, is that there needs to be internal specialists that develop those indicators and understand how to monitor them. And so there's some expertise that does need to be developed in capacity internally at the utilities for that to happen. So you might appreciate now how this is very different to how organizations have really tackled improvement in other respects. So frequently, like a typical safety assessment, I don't know safety culture, just the safety assessment performed in the industry is a gap analysis. It's based on, analysis of based on like, what is the standard? This is the standard. This is what the standard says. This is what you're doing. And here are the things you need to fix to come to the standard. Our safety culture assessments are much more open-ended and nuanced. So the understanding of the results plays a pivotal role for improvement, and the cultural indicators enable monitoring effectiveness of what is being implemented prior to the next assessment. Again, the indicators in this case, they're not measures of culture, but they're measures of how effective a specific initiative or a specific action is at achieving what it was intended to achieve. But again, it's not measuring culture. So here we're just going to talk a little bit about a structured approach for using indicators to support safety culture improvement efforts. The most important point is that indicators should not be the starting point, right? The process begins with the assessment results. And for example, this is where it might make a little bit more sense, is employees may perceive that cost or production pressures are increasing risk. So the next step is that, and again, often most challenging, is turning that finding into insight. We need to understand why people hold that perception, what leadership messages, incentives, systems, or decision-making processes are contributing to it. This is where organizations also often struggle. And we've all, some of us have been through this process alongside another utility and have witnessed it. There can be, for example, a tendency to move directly from findings to actions, but without understanding the underlying causes of what's driving the employees to perceive that cost or production pressure is a risk, it will be difficult to design an effective improvement. So once we have, assuming you go through the process, you gather the insight, you go through this process of gathering all this insight from the organization, we can design targeted initiatives that address the specific causes. So for example, in this case, if employees perceive that cost pressures are affecting safety because of reward systems or management messaging, then the improvement efforts should directly target those factors. And that's what you would be measuring, is those mechanisms, not something else. Only after we have established this clear connection do indicators actually become useful. We select the indicators that are linked to the intended mechanism of change. The purpose is not to measure culture directly, but to look for evidence that the desired changes are occurring. So as the indicators begin to show patterns, they should be used as learning tools. The indicators are clues, they are not proofs. They help us ask better questions about whether our assumptions are correct. In that exercise of gathering the insights from the organization about why the culture is the way it is, there's going to be assumptions that are made. And so this process helps you understand, oh, well, maybe my assumptions were correct. Maybe they were not. And that's where you have to course correct and change your approach or your initiative. And it helps you see, again, might sound repetitive, just whether the initiative is having the intended effect. Now, based on what we learn on monitoring those indicators, we then adjust, we refine, we expand, or replace initiatives as necessary. And then this creates that ongoing learning cycle rather than a one-time improvement effort. The guardrails at the bottom, they basically reinforce three key principles. First, indicators should always be linked to a specific cultural issue. Second, they should reflect the intended change mechanism. Third, they must be interpreted in context rather than viewed as like standalone scores. It is also important to recognize what indicators are not, right? And I sound like a broken record, but I will say it again. They are not direct measures of safety culture. And this is really important to understand. They're not assessing culture. They are not a substitute for a comprehensive assessment. And they should never become, and this might sound strange, but they should not become targets that people or the organization try to achieve for their own sake. And essentially, it ruins the metric once you do that, the measure, once it becomes a target. The pursuit should be about learning, not meeting the target. And I understand that that's hard when there's a tendency to manage the indicator or the metric in order to demonstrate improvement. But the real improvement actually comes from what we learn through monitoring that metric or that indicator, the insight, rather than just meeting the target. So management's assessment of those indicators in context of what they are doing should be focused on learning rather than meeting the target. The medical analogy at the bottom there helps explain this concept. You know, a full safety culture assessment is like a medical examination. Indicators are like a fitness tracker. They're valuable for monitoring progress and identifying trends, but they cannot provide a complete diagnosis on their own. And essentially, you know, what I'd like you to take away here is that effective improvement requires insight before action, and indicators support learning, and learning enables the organizations to continuously refine and strengthen their improvement efforts. So as we begin exploring other topics within this working group, such as focus areas and indicators for self-evaluations, I think it is important to keep these concepts and improvement processes in mind. Ultimately, if we cannot explain how an initiative is expected to change the underlying cultural issue, then no indicator can tell us whether it is working. Then the improvement self-evaluation, this is all another clarification. This is something to keep in mind as we start working on this, is that the improvement self-evaluations in the safety culture framework are focused on monitoring improvement. They're not reassessing the culture. And indicators do not measure culture directly. They don't tell us whether safety culture has improved. But in the case of the indicators we discussed today, they help us understand whether the initiatives designed to improve safety culture are having their intended effect. So as we conclude this section, there are some key messages I'd like you to remember. First, assessment findings must be translated into insight before developing improvement initiatives. Understanding the underlying reasons before, behind a finding or behind the results is an essential first step. Second, understanding the root causes and cultural drivers behind assessment findings is critical to designing meaningful interventions. Without this deeper understanding, organizations risk implementing actions that address symptoms rather than the factors shaping the culture. And third, there must be a clear cause and effect link between the cultural issue and the initiative. Improvement efforts should be directly connected to the specific cultural drivers that have been identified through the assessment. If that connection is not clear, it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, to determine whether an initiative is improving the aspect of culture it was intended to address. So finally, indicators should be used to monitor the effectiveness of specific initiatives. In many cases, these indicators will be qualitative and focused on whether the expected changes are occurring. It is important to remember that indicators, again, broken record, do not measure safety culture directly. The overall message, takeaway today, insight comes before action. Actions must be linked to the cultural issue. And indicators support learning about whether those actions are working. So before I move on to questions, actually, let's move right into questions. I'm going to just stop sharing my screen. I do want to just check if there's anything about what I shared today, Dr. Fleming, and this is a lot of the work you as the expert advisor in that proceeding helped, that you think would be useful to add for this audience to understand.
No, I think you covered everything. I'd be just interested if people have got questions, then we can clarify them. But yeah, no, I agree with everything you said.
Great, thank you. I know this was a lot of information, and we were coming off talking about examples, but if there's anything in particular that anybody wants to comment about or share, or even just a question for Dr. Fleming or myself or for the rest of the group, this would be a time. Bill, I see your camera is on, so I'm assuming you might have a question, but you're muted at the moment.
Thank you, Carolina. I'm not embarrassed at all. So
That's good.
yeah, I appreciate that presentation. That's been a similar problem in the nuclear industry, and we went through that same training. We did create a document that is addressing a process that is addressing exactly what you are saying, and we've been using that since 2000. I'm going to share that with my working group and to see if it'd be helpful for them. But spot on with those insights. Thank you.
And if you are interested, or if you think it might be helpful for our group to learn more about your process and your document, that would be great. It would be great to have some insights from you.
Oh, okay. Should I send that to our facilitator?
You can send it to facilitators, send it to that subgroup. That would be great.
Yeah, I'll send it to the subgroup. Okay, great. Will do. Thank you.
And if there's any interest in this group, we can send it to, if Bill is okay with that, we can send it to the main group as well.
Just one thing I think sometimes organizations struggle a little bit with is that when they get a typical safety report or any other report of an assessment or anything, they often expect a set of recommendations and actions they should take. And so when they are doing a comprehensive safety culture assessment, the fact that there's a sort of not a recipe of what they need to do to fix it, I think people can feel a little bit frustrated with. Why did I pay you to do this assessment if you're not telling me what to do? And the challenge with culture is that the insight from the assessment needs to be sort of, the organization needs to gain that insight. The people who do the assessment often get that insight, but they're external, so it needs to make sense to the organization, and that process of making sense of the results actually is takes a little while and a little bit of effort for everybody to get their head around, and that part of the process is different for people than what they may be expecting. Particular managers, senior managers have not maybe been as involved in the process. So making people aware of that in advance, I think, can be quite helpful. And also trying to stay abreast of what the assessment is doing and the different methods, I think, is also helpful. And also, I think sometimes I'm a bit surprised organizations are willing to implement things and just assume they work rather than actually evaluating the extent to which it's working as intended, right? So you might think, oh, we've got an issue with safety leadership, we'll give safety leadership training to all our managers and supervisors, and then you assume that you've improved safety leadership, but that's actually quite a big assumption. So the issue may not be training. So just because you say, oh, well, give them training, that will improve safety leadership, actually, if the issue is not knowledge or skills, then that probably isn't going to work. And, that is just wasting more resources, which is unhelpful. So I think those are the things that organizations struggle with. First of all, they assume when they get a report that they have the answer, rather than having to work out what it all means. And then the second part is there's a tendency, at least in my observation in safety, that every time they have they do something or an intervention, they assume it works, and that's unlikely to be true.
Thanks, Dr. Fleming. And to add on to that, I think the assumption it'll work, this is kind of where the indicators come in as well, in that if you don't have an indicator that is very tied to what you're actually trying to achieve, and then you don't understand very concretely why you're trying to do what you're trying to do and how the mechanism that it's going to how it's going to work, then you can't come up with an indicator that will tell you that. And then you won't have the ability to understand whether what you're doing is moving you in the right direction or not. So, we're all tying that. And I think there's an item here, and this is particularly relevant to SDG&E, and this is probably more conversations that worth having, is the efforts that you might want to take on right now about preparing your leadership, about what's coming up, making sure this shared understanding is actually working its way there, and that they know what to expect. And then as a bigger group here, this bigger group understanding what to expect. And I think this goes to Mark's point of the actionable recommendations. It's not going to look like you need to do this, you need to do this, and you need to do this. It's going to require a lot more work from the company to take that information and make something of it so that you're able to gain insights and put something in place that works for your culture to improve. And I'm going to give everyone, I know we are at time, but I want to make sure that anybody has any comments or thoughts, who's able to do so right now. And again, any thoughts as well, you can share with myself and the group. And you do have Mark as well online, so take advantage of it.
Yeah. So Carolina, this is Bill again. So, I remember one situation, like you said, we didn't have a metric, so we actually end up creating one or two to help us make sure we got indicators that we were solving the problem. So, that's also an option for a station. They don't have to use any existing indicators, but we can go out to the industry and look and create our own. So, and then as a work group, we can help each other with that. That's it.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities here for our work group and for collaboration and just in helping everybody improve. Thanks, Bill. Okay, not seeing any more comments and questions. Let's move on to our next steps. Okay, so is everybody seeing the screen? For some reason it's not working. Okay. Oh. Okay. So as we move on to our next working group meeting, before we do that, as promised, we will collect feedback on the work plan and website from you all. So you should be hearing from us shortly as a follow-up to this meeting, so we can get your feedback on that. And I think we will include some of the items also that came up from Michelle and Sarah's presentation on the subgroup. Then at our next meeting, it's been scheduled for Friday, September 4th. That'll be our Q3 meeting from 9 to 12. And the subgroup will be sharing the output of their efforts at that particular meeting. There might be room for some more topic discussion on other items like the indicators as we start veering into the directions of the self-evaluations and whatnot. So there might be some more information around that we can discuss. And then we have our fourth quarter workshop also scheduled for the December 4th, from Friday, December 4th from 9 to 12 p.m. These just happen to be weeks where the commission is meeting. So we can't take the Thursday and we have to, been scheduling these on Fridays. But other than that, I think that is what we've got for you today. Any questions on these items?
So one more question, Carolina. I know you captured notes on the meeting today. Is that going to reside on the website somewhere so we can reference it?
So let me chat with what works. That is one idea, to put them on the website. That would be great. If there's no objections of making them public facing that way, we could do that. And the alternative is to email them to everybody. So do you have a particular preference?
If it's emailed to me, that's great. Sometimes network doesn't always work well. So if I have it in my box, I can always reference it prior to the next meeting. So that's my
Okay.
preference, but I'll leave that up to the team.
Okay. Thank you for sharing, Bill. It's a good question. And we have our questions. Well, were any other questions as we wrap up for today? Okay.
I'd just like to know how we did. I mean, is there an opinion from the team? How do you think this meeting went? Was it helpful? And, was there anything else we could do better?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. Let's, anybody brave enough to share? We're happy to hear. Won't be embarrassed.
I can go first if that helps. So I like the meeting. I like everyone's presentation. I know we're all learning in this thing. I think the only thing that might have been just a little bit awkward was, the survey on the fly. I don't know if there's a way out of that, but all the technical issues we got and trying to survey that. I think if we had that information up front, that would have saved the team some time and maybe some technical frustration. But I mean, we went through that. Okay. I particularly liked the last presentation you did about solving the right problem. I thought that was just very, very good for us to see that, and then being able to contribute a little bit to the process of how we did that in the nuclear industry. I think that was good. And maybe another delta for us is that I felt like there was engagement, but I think we could have heard more from other folks. There's 30 plus people on the call, and it would have been nice to hear more from them and their opinions. It's always nice getting more discussion going. That's it. Overall, I thought the meeting was productive.
Thank you, Bill. Agree on all your points. Rich.
Yeah, I just want to second what Bill just said about getting engagement from folks. I think we've heard from a lot of people who are kind of regulars in a lot of the working group meetings that we've had, and it would be great to hear from everybody, because that's going to be so critical, I think, in the long run.
Thanks, Rich. That's a theme that we'll definitely need to keep in mind. Hopefully, there'll be more engagement when we get the output, but in the meantime, we'll be connecting with everybody so that you can provide feedback on the work plan and the website. And just know that you can also bring up anything else you need. Okay, well, not seeing a lot more. Bill, you've given me an idea. Maybe in our follow-up, we need to also ask for feedback on today and see if anybody's willing to share a little bit more. So thanks for that. So I'd like to thank everyone for their participation, your insights, and your willingness to engage in these discussions. Those who are willing to, thank you. Today's conversation, I think, reinforces a few things. Safety culture is complex. There's no single framework, indicators, or assessment result that can fully capture it all. But what matters is that we're developing a shared understanding of the concepts. We're learning from all of our work. And we want to make sure we continue that process forward. So I want to thank Sarah and Michelle for being on our call today and facilitating the group. This will be expanded and you'll be hearing a lot more from both of them. It's great to have you on. Thank you to Dr. Fleming for making a cameo appearance at the end of our presentation and being available to help us understand some of this a little bit further. And I look forward to our next meeting and hearing more from the working group, the subgroup, on the outputs of the efforts. So thank you all very much and have a great weekend.
Thank you.